I worked as a sheriff's deputy for a little over 8 years. Most overnight calls are exactly what you'd expect. Noise complaints, disabled vehicles, occasionally a burglary alarm. The calls that always made me uneasy, though, were welfare checks. Most of the time they turned out to be nothing. An elderly person who forgot to answer the phone, a vacation home with a television left on, a neighbor who misunderstood what they saw. You never knew what you were walking into until you got there. This happened during the fall of my 5th year on patrol. It was just after 2:30 in the morning when dispatch sent me to check on a farmhouse about 15 miles outside town. The caller lived across the road. He told dispatch the property had been empty for months, but for the past 3 nights he'd seen lights turning on inside the house around midnight. The owner had died 6 months earlier. According to county records, no family members had claimed the property. The electricity was supposed to have been disconnected shortly after the funeral. Dispatch didn't think much of it. They assumed someone had broken in. I acknowledged the call and started driving. The farther I got from town, the darker the roads became. No streetlights, no other traffic, just miles of farmland and scattered woods. About 20 minutes later, I turned onto a narrow gravel driveway. The farmhouse sat nearly 300 yards from the road. Even before I got out of my patrol car, I could see the lights. Every downstairs window was glowing. The front porch light was on. So were the kitchen lights. Even an upstairs bedroom was illuminated. It looked like someone was awake. I parked where my dash camera had a clear view of the front door and notified dispatch that I was on scene. Then I walked up to the house. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. There were no vehicles in the driveway, no fresh tire tracks. The gravel hadn't been disturbed except by my patrol car. I checked the porch. No packages, no footprints, no cigarette butts. Nothing that suggested anyone had been there recently. I knocked several times, identified myself, waited. No answer. I walked around the entire house, shining my flashlight through every window. The furniture was still there. Dust covered most of it. Nothing appeared disturbed. But every room was brightly lit. It didn't make any sense. I radioed dispatch and asked them to confirm the utility records. A minute later, they came back. The electrical service was disconnected 5 months ago. I looked at the glowing windows again. Then at the power lines feeding the house. Everything looked normal. Before I could say anything else, my portable radio crackled. I assumed it was dispatch. Instead, a calm male voice quietly said, "You're at the wrong house." The transmission lasted only a second. Then the radio went silent. I immediately asked dispatch if they'd just transmitted. There was a pause. Then they replied, "Negative. We didn't say anything." I checked the display on my radio. No incoming unit ID. No recorded transmission. Nothing. Dispatch suggested another nearby agency might have accidentally transmitted on our frequency. It didn't sound like interference. The voice had been perfectly clear. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone nearby had been watching me. The farmhouse itself didn't offer many places to hide, but about 50 yards behind it stood an old wooden barn. The large sliding door was partly open. I drew my flashlight and announced myself before stepping inside. The smell of damp wood and old hay hit me immediately. At first, the barn looked abandoned. Broken farm equipment, empty feed bins, dust everywhere. Then my light reached the back wall. Someone had been living there. There was a folding chair, a sleeping bag, several cases of bottled water, a camping stove, rechargeable batteries, portable police scanners, maps of the county, not tourist maps, detailed road maps with handwritten notes covering the margins. I slowly kept looking around. Pinned to one wall were dozens of aerial photographs. Each one showed a different sheriff's deputy, some walking into convenience stores, some fueling patrol cars, some standing outside the courthouse. Every photograph had a date written beneath it. Some were weeks old, some were years old. Then I found the last photograph. The date was today's. It showed my patrol car parked outside a gas station earlier that afternoon while I'd been inside buying coffee. I stared at it for several seconds. I hadn't noticed anyone watching me. Beneath the photograph, someone had written my unit number in black marker. I backed out of the barn and immediately requested additional units. Within minutes, deputies surrounded the property. The farmhouse was searched from top to bottom. Nobody was inside. The barn was searched again. By then, the folding chair, the sleeping bag, the bottled water, the scanners, and every photograph were gone. Only the pushpins remained in the wooden wall. Crime scene investigators searched the property until sunrise. They recovered fresh fingerprints from the barn door, footprints leading into the surrounding woods, and one portable radio antenna hidden beneath loose boards in the floor. But they never found the person who had been using the barn. A week later, detectives discovered something else. The photograph of my patrol car hadn't been taken from the road. It had been taken from less than 20 feet away, which meant whoever took it had been standing close enough to read my name tag, and I never noticed them. I transferred out of that patrol district before the end of the year. People assume it was because of the photographs. It wasn't. It was remembering that voice on my radio, because dispatch later confirmed something they hadn't told me that night. The transmission didn't come from another agency. It came from a handheld police radio, using my department's encrypted frequency, a radio that had never been issued to anyone. I worked as a police officer for nearly 9 years. Most people think county jails are chaotic. The truth is, they're usually the opposite, especially after midnight. By then, everyone has either sobered up, fallen asleep, or accepted they're not getting out until morning. The loudest sound is usually the ventilation system echoing through the concrete hallways. That's why even the smallest thing out of place gets your attention. This happened during an overnight shift at one of the smaller county jails in my district. It was just after 1 a.m. when my partner and I arrested a man for disorderly conduct outside a closed convenience store. The arrest itself couldn't have been easier. He never resisted, never raised his voice, never even asked why he was being arrested. He simply held out his hands before I even reached for my handcuffs. The entire drive to the jail, he stared out the window without saying a word. I tried making conversation a few times. Nothing. He didn't appear intoxicated. He wasn't injured. If anything, he seemed unusually calm. When we arrived at the jail, the booking officer completed the paperwork, fingerprints, photographs, property inventory. Everything was routine. The suspect answered every question correctly. Name, date of birth, address. Then he went completely silent again. Holding cell 3 was empty that night, so I escorted him downstairs. I removed the handcuffs, stepped back, and watched him walk inside. He sat on the concrete bench without being told. Didn't ask for a phone call. Didn't ask when he'd be released. He simply folded his hands in his lap. I closed the steel door. The electronic lock engaged with its usual heavy click. A green light on the control panel confirmed the cell was secure. I checked it twice out of habit. Then I headed back upstairs. About 30 minutes later, the control room alarm sounded. Cell 3 door open. The dispatcher inside the jail immediately looked at the monitor. That's impossible. I was closest, so I headed downstairs with another officer. The hallway was empty. Cell 3 was exactly as I'd left it. The locking bolts were fully engaged. The suspect was still sitting on the bench. He looked up as we approached. "You forgot something?" he asked. I ignored the question and checked the door. No damage. No sign it had opened. Maintenance reset the sensor, assuming it had malfunctioned. These systems were old. False alarms happened occasionally. We logged the incident and went back upstairs. 10 minutes later, the alarm sounded again. Cell 3 door open. This time every officer in booking looked at each other before moving. We all walked downstairs together. Again, the door was locked. The suspect hadn't moved. Maintenance tested the sensor right there. It passed every diagnostic. The lock worked perfectly. The control system showed the door had opened for nearly 7 seconds. The physical lock had never moved. As we stood there trying to understand it, the suspect quietly spoke. "Did the other one leave?" I looked at him. "What other one?" He frowned. "The officer. The one who checked on me 5 minutes ago." Every officer in the hallway looked at each other. Nobody had come downstairs since the first alarm. "You've only seen me," I told him. He slowly shook his head. "No, there were 2 of you." He stood right outside the door. He didn't say anything. He just watched me. A chill ran through me. The jail's hallway was covered by multiple cameras. If anyone had entered the cell block, we'd know. We immediately reviewed the surveillance footage. Every camera showed the same thing. No one walked into the hallway. No one approached cell 3. No doors opened. No blind spots. Nothing. Then the technician slowed the recording frame by frame. Just before the second alarm activated, the polished surface of the steel cell door briefly reflected 2 uniformed officers standing outside the cell. The hallway camera, filmed from the opposite direction, showed only me, no second officer. The reflection lasted less than a second, then it disappeared. Maintenance spent the rest of the night replacing the door sensor. They never found a fault. The suspect remained completely cooperative until morning. When his release paperwork was finished, I escorted him toward the lobby. Just before he walked out the front door, he stopped beside me. Without looking in my direction, he quietly said, "Next time, don't let the second one unlock the door first." Then he walked away. I stood there for several seconds before turning back toward the booking area. I never saw him again. Months later, the jail completed a full renovation. Every lock, every sensor, every camera in that cell block was replaced. No explanation was ever found for the alerts that night. People usually ask if the alarms were what bothered me most. They weren't. It was realizing something much simpler. If the hallway camera was right, then I was the only officer who ever stood outside cell 3. But if the reflection was right, someone else had been standing beside me, close enough to unlock a door that never actually opened. I spent almost 12 years working as a property crimes detective. Most people imagine detectives spend their days chasing suspects or solving murders. In reality, a surprising amount of the job is paperwork. Every photograph, every fingerprint, every recovered item, everything has to be documented. And once a case is closed, every piece of evidence has to be returned, destroyed, or transferred according to department policy. If the chain of custody breaks, the entire case can fall apart. This happened late one Thursday night. I'd finally closed a burglary investigation that had dragged on for nearly 2 years. The suspect had accepted a plea agreement, and the judge had signed the final order releasing the remaining evidence. My job was simple: return the last evidence box to the secured evidence room, log it into the system, go home. By the time I finished the paperwork, it was almost 12:30 in the morning. Most of the detectives had already left. Only dispatch, one patrol supervisor, and a civilian records clerk were still inside the station. The evidence room was located in the basement. No windows, concrete walls, 2 electronic security doors. Every locker required both an employee badge and a unique access code. Every opening was automatically recorded. Nothing entered or left that room without creating a permanent log. I scanned my badge, entered my code, placed the evidence box into its assigned locker. The system accepted the transaction. I locked the door and headed upstairs. I had barely sat back down at my desk when my computer chimed. Evidence locker access detected. That wasn't unusual. Other detectives occasionally worked late, but when I looked at the notification, my stomach tightened. Access authorized, Detective M. Carter, my name. According to the system, my badge had just opened another evidence locker. The problem, I was still sitting at my desk. I looked down at my badge. It was clipped to my shirt exactly where it had been all night. I figured the software had glitched. The evidence management system was old, and false notifications happened from time to time. Still, department policy required every unexplained access to be verified. I grabbed my keys and headed back downstairs. The hallway outside the evidence room was empty. The security door was still locked. I scanned my badge again. The door buzzed open. Everything inside looked normal, until I noticed one locker hadn't fully closed. The door was open by less than an inch. I walked over and carefully pulled it open. Inside sat a sealed cardboard evidence box. The property label caught my attention immediately. It belonged to an armed robbery investigation, case number 18-447. I knew that number. I'd worked it 8 years earlier. The suspect had been convicted. The evidence had been destroyed after the appeal period expired. That box shouldn't have existed anymore. Curious, I cut the evidence seal. Inside were only 3 items: a disposable camera, a handwritten property receipt, and a folded patrol schedule. I unfolded the schedule. It listed tomorrow night's patrol assignments. My patrol assignment. I frowned. I hadn't worked patrol in almost 5 years. I'd been a detective ever since. Someone had typed my name into a patrol rotation that didn't exist. Thinking someone in administration had made a mistake, I looked at the handwritten receipt. Then I felt the room suddenly become very quiet. The receipt had my signature, exactly like I write it. The date beside it was tomorrow. I stared at it for several seconds. The ink looked fresh. The paper wasn't aged. It looked as though someone had completed it only hours earlier. I immediately called the patrol supervisor downstairs. Together we reviewed the electronic access logs. According to the system, only one person had entered the evidence room during the previous hour. Me. No duplicate badge scans. No unauthorized access. Nothing. The supervisor requested surveillance footage. The hallway camera clearly showed me entering the room once. Nobody entered before me. Nobody left after me. Then the technician noticed something. The camera covering the evidence lockers froze, exactly 91 seconds. When the recording resumed, I was walking out carrying nothing. The locker door that had been standing open was closed again. Crime scene technicians searched the room the next morning. The evidence box was gone. The disposable camera, the receipt, the patrol schedule, everything had disappeared. The only thing left behind was the electronic transaction record showing the locker had been opened using my badge. Internal Affairs reviewed my access history. They searched my office, my locker, even my patrol vehicle. Nothing was ever found. A few weeks later, I transferred to another division. People always assume it was because someone somehow accessed the evidence room. It wasn't. What bothered me most was that property receipt. Because someone had copied my signature perfectly. The handwriting, the pressure, even the small mark I accidentally leave beneath the last letter of my name. Every detail was identical, except for one thing. I didn't sign it. Not that night, not the next day, not ever, which means, somewhere, someone had already completed paperwork for evidence that hadn't existed yet. Using a signature I hadn't written.